More than 16 centuries passed, when the world's edges faded into mystery and silence. Lands were carved apart by wild mountains, deep forests, and the hush of isolation. In this vast and uncharted expanse, a solitary monk in China set his gaze beyond the horizon, preparing for a journey that would echo through the ages. His name was Faxian, a seeker of wisdom, a soul aflame with devotion, living in the Eastern Jin dynasty, when minds hungered for meaning and spirits yearned for the light. Faxian was no ordinary monk. He was an elderly seeker of truth, already in his mid-60s when he decided to embark on an unimaginably long pilgrimage. The reason for his mission was both noble and spiritual: to recover the original Buddhist scriptures from the land of their birth, India, which in his eyes held the purest and most authentic teachings of the Buddha. At that time, the teachings of Buddhism in China were inconsistent, fragmented, and sometimes incorrect due to translation errors and missing texts. Faxian believed that without the original sutras and Vinaya rules, the path of Buddhism in China would lose its essence. So, in 399 CE, driven by faith and fortified by purpose, he began an overland trek that would cover tens of thousands of kilometers, crossing deadly deserts, frigid mountain ranges and foreign lands with little more than a robe, a walking stick and, honestly, an iron will. He wasn't chasing fame, fortune or conquest, he was walking for wisdom. With a few fellow monks who shared his dream, he started westward along the Silk Road, passing through ancient towns like Chang'an, Dunhuang, and the treacherous Gobi Desert. The physical toll was enormous: the biting cold of the high mountains, the sweltering heat of the deserts, the constant threat of robbers and bandits, and the lack of proper food or water. It was a journey meant to break even the strongest of men. Yet, this humble monk endured every hardship, driven by nothing more than the spiritual calling to restore Buddhism's original voice to his homeland. His resolve, discipline, and spiritual devotion made him not just a traveler, but a living embodiment of the path he followed. After enduring unimaginable hardship and travel through Central Asia, I eventually reached the land I had dreamed of all my life: India. This was not just the political or geographic center of South Asia. To me, it was the spiritual heart of the world. Here, I hoped to walk in the footsteps of the Buddha himself. As I entered India, I saw a flourishing landscape of learning, philosophy, and ritual. I visited the legendary cities of Mathura, Kapilavastu, Lumbini, Kushinagar, Sarnath and Pataliputra, each holding immense spiritual significance in the life of Gautama Buddha. I saw monks in saffron robes chanting sutras under ancient banyan trees, and I visited monasteries where disciples still preserved oral traditions passed down for centuries. I spent time at Nalanda, centuries before it rose to become a formal university, and immersed myself in studying Sanskrit to read and understand the scriptures firsthand. I didn't simply pass through India like a tourist. I lived there. I observed Indian society in detail, from how kings supported monastic orders to how lay people practiced generosity, from the governance system to the architecture of temples and stupas. I documented everything meticulously, creating what would later become an irreplaceable time capsule of 5th century India. His writings reveal how India treated religion with remarkable openness and harmony, even as it teemed with different schools of thought like Hinayana, Mahayana, Brahmanism, and Jainism. He also recorded stories of how people bathed in rivers like the Ganges for spiritual purification, and how the relics of the Buddha were revered across the subcontinent. He collected not just manuscripts but moral and philosophical treasures, understanding the Vinaya, discipline, sutra, teaching, and Abhidharma, philosophical texts with depth. Faxian's immersion lasted for several years. His experiences were not confined to the grand cities. He also visited humble monastic communities and remote caves where reclusive monks meditated in silence. India, in Faxian's eyes, was a land where the true Dharma flourished, and it became not just the destination of his pilgrimage but the school of his enlightenment. The hospitality he received from kings, monks, and common people alike left a deep impression on him, and he never stopped recording every element of his encounters. In these Indian years, Faxian found not only sacred texts, but the living, breathing essence of the Buddha's teachings untouched by time. After years of study, observation and collection, Faxian was ready to return to China. But the return journey was far more perilous than even his outward trek. Unlike his arrival by land, Faxian chose to return by sea, a route that carried different kinds of risks. He first travelled to Sri Lanka, where Buddhism was also thriving, and where sacred relics and scriptures had been preserved with deep reverence. There he marvelled at the tooth relic of the Buddha, which was housed in a richly adorned temple and revered as a national treasure. But as he set sail from Sri Lanka toward China, nature turned violent. A monsoon storm swallowed his ship and threw it off course. For days, perhaps weeks, he battled raging seas, vomiting passengers, broken sails and near starvation. The storm did not just alter his route, it nearly ended his life. The ship eventually drifted far south, landing on the shores of Java, which is modern-day Indonesia. Stranded in a foreign land, he had no choice but to live there for 2 long years. And even there, he did not rest. He studied local Buddhist practices, compared them with those in India and China, and took detailed notes. When he finally secured another passage to China, he returned not just as a pilgrim, but as a repository of transcontinental knowledge. By the time Faxian arrived back home in Chang'an, which is now modern-day Xi'an, in the year 414, he was nearly 80 years old. His robes were worn, his body was weak, but in his hands he held hundreds of scriptures, relics and notes that would become the backbone of Chinese Buddhism. He had been gone for 14 years. Immediately, he began translating the text from Sanskrit into classical Chinese, carefully comparing meanings and interpretations, making sure that no nuance was lost along the way. The work was painstaking and took years, but the results were honestly revolutionary. His translation of the Mahasamgika Vinaya, among others, brought clarity to Chinese monastic rules. More importantly, Faxian wrote a book, a record of Buddhist kingdoms, or Foguoji, a travelogue that chronicled not just his physical journey, but the spiritual geography of Asia. In it, he described the size of cities, the behavior of monks, the traditions of commoners, and the architectural styles of temples. It remains one of the most precious documents in Buddhist and world travel history, offering a first-hand view of 5th century Asia, long before the time of Marco Polo or Ibn Battuta. Today, Faxian is remembered not as a conqueror, but as a pilgrim of peace, a scholar of unmatched dedication, and a traveller whose journey transcended physical geography to explore the deepest realms of faith, knowledge, and endurance. His courage was not in battle, but in the silent persistence of walking through hardship for a cause greater than himself. In an age where borders were real barriers and travel meant risking one's life, Faxian built bridges of culture, of thought, and of spiritual continuity between China, India, and beyond. The manuscripts he translated became foundational texts for Chinese Buddhism. His journey inspired not just monks like Xuanzang and Yijing, but also historians, linguists, and anthropologists centuries later. The record of Buddhist kingdoms is now studied globally as a rare eyewitness account of ancient societies that no longer exist in the same form. His travel became a symbol of devotion without boundaries, of scholarship without ego, and of exploration without violence. What makes Faxian's story even more extraordinary is how relevant it remains today. In an age filled with digital distractions and instant gratification, Faxian's life reminds us of the power of patience, purpose, and persistence. He didn't walk for money. He didn't sail for fame. He journeyed for truth, and truth alone. His story is a meditation in motion, a saga that inspires anyone who believes that knowledge is worth every mile walked. Even in his old age, with death waiting at every corner, he continued forward, not with weapons or wealth, but with scrolls and faith. So the next time we speak of great travelers, of those who dared to cross the limits of their world, let us not forget the name Faxian, the monk who walked for wisdom and gave the world a map of not just land, but of enlightenment.